Revelation 21 this morning, and either today or next Sunday we will be finishing up the book of Revelation, and we'll spend the month of March covering a few various topics, and then Sam is jumping in to teach this class starting in the second quarter, and we'll be in the Gospel of Mark. So you can look forward to that. But I've enjoyed our study. Thank you for putting up with me for 2 quarters as we've gone through the book of Revelation. I hope it's been helpful. You've been very encouraging to me as we've gone through it. And there's a lot that I still don't understand about the book of Revelation, but it has become a book that I'm passionate about because of its powerful message to us and the confidence and strength it can give us, even if we're seeing dark things going on in the world. God still rules, and we can have faith and hope no matter what we face. So we're in Revelation chapter 21, and we said last time that chapter 21 is a contrast in many ways of chapter 17, pictured as the harlot, the evil woman, another way of speaking of the enemies facing God's people of this time. And then in chapter 21, we're presented with the bride. So you have this harlot, an unfaithful, wicked kind of relationship, and a bride, a faithful, righteous, beautiful relationship sanctified by God. And so you can see there's lots of things that compare between the language that's talked about them. And one of the things that we talked about last time is here towards the end of chapter 21, beginning in verse 24, the nations will walk by its light, and the kings of the earth will bring their glory into it. Whereas when we saw back in chapter 17, it mentioned the kings of the earth too, but because they were roused by the enemy, because they had become drunken with the wickedness, they came to destroy. Everything was being destroyed by them instead. And so it also tells you how when God comes into the picture, he helps bring order from top to bottom and turns things around. And we see that too within the church and what is going to be the ultimate experience in eternity when all of God's people are gathered together and all of the wicked are removed. But I want us to go back to Revelation 21 and verse 22. It says, I saw no temple in it, in this new city coming down out of heaven from God. I saw no temple in it, for the Lord God, the Almighty, and the Lamb are its temple. And the city has no need of sun or of the moon to shine on it, for the glory of God has illumined it, and its lamp is the Lamb. The nations will walk by its light, and the kings of the earth will bring their glory into it. In the daytime, for there will be no night there, its gates will never be closed, and they will bring their glory and the honor of the nations into it, and nothing unclean, and no one who practices abomination and lying shall ever come into it, but only those whose names are written in the Lamb's book of life. So, in verse 21, it emphasizes that there's no temple in this city. Well, it says that really from the expectation of, okay, you're reading about the city coming from God. You would expect there to be in a temple. Why? Why does he write it that way?
Described as Jerusalem.
Okay, it's described as Jerusalem, and the temple was a core part of that city. Why was it a core part of that city?
This is the new Jerusalem.
Yeah.
We need a temple. We have God.
Yeah, it's the new Jerusalem, the heavenly Jerusalem. And so there's not the need of that physical temple.
The temple was always, as far as historically, it was a representation on a total different, we don't need it.
Yeah. So it is meant to be God's presence. When you think, especially, we talked about how it says it's laid out as a square or as a cube, and the only other thing in the Old Testament, as far as I'm aware, that had those same cube dimensions would have been the most holy place. So when you think about the most holy place, what did it represent? What was in it? What did that mean to Jews? It was the presence of God. Yeah, he dwelt among the cherubim. So you have the altar there, the cherubim that were set up on there. And it used language when it talked about the altar in the Old Testament. It talked about as if God was sitting there on top.
The mercy seat. There wasn't an altar in the holy place.
Yeah, the mercy seat. Thank you. Well, let's get the Ark of the Covenant. That's what I'm thinking of, not altar, Ark of the Covenant. Thank you. But that's where God met with his people. And then it used this language of you will come there and meet with me. You will meet with me there. And so it represented to them as this very special place. What are some other ways that God made the most holy place in the Ark of the Covenant unique and special? How did it have that kind of sense to them?
Well, the high priest could only go there once a year.
Okay.
In the very presence of
Yeah, the high priest was the only one that could go in there once a year. Did he have to do anything to prepare to go in there? What kinds of things?
Ceremonial washing,
Yeah.
wear the right clothes.
Cleansing. Everything that he used had to be cleansed, had to be prepared. He had to be holy. The utensils had to be holy. Everything had to be made pure. And so everything about the holy place and what God said about it was meant to just create this sense of there is no place in the world like this one room in the temple in Jerusalem. And I imagine as a Jew, living that and seeing that, you just had this feeling. I mean, we get senses of that a little bit. I haven't had the privilege of going to Washington, D.C. yet. I want to. But I've been other places like it, and people that have been there tell me there's a feeling, there's a sense that you get when you go by the White House or when you're in front of the Pentagon. There's symbols that mean something to us as Americans. And so there's just this feeling that because of the way we talk about it, that it gets built up. How much more so when those words and the feeling has been created by God to specifically put that in your mind? Terrell?
I was thinking that, for the Jewish people, the temple, not necessarily the holiest of holies, because they never got to go inside, so they didn't really get to see the specialness. But what that place represented is that's where we go because of our sin. And they had to do it every year at least, and they could go even other times when they wanted that sacrifice for other sins. But that Day of Atonement, we all gathered at this location to be reminded of our sin. We sacrifice for our sin. Well, in heaven, there's no sin. There's no death, no sin. So the very purpose of the temple is gone.
Right.
God will be in our presence. We will be literally in his presence. There'll be no sin. So.
Yeah. Hasn't that already happened to some extent?
Well, we're still living among sin.
Yeah, we are.
Consequences.
And we still fall to it. But what's the language of what Christ has done and what happens when you become a Christian?
He has seated us in the heavenly place.
Okay, we're seated in the heavenly places. So we're in this special place. What about specifically this language about entering the most holy place? What does the New Testament say?
That he has entered through the veil.
Mhm.
He has entered the most
Right. He has entered the most holy place for us. He's offered this. He's cleansed this so that Hebrews chapter 9 and Hebrews chapter 10, so that what?
If we can enter with no guilt.
We can enter with confidence, with boldness, I can feel that when I, in my mind, begin to pray, I can be confident I am in the presence of God. Jesus has opened that up. And so I think as Christians, Paul says everything written before time was written for our learning. The Hebrew writer says everything in the Old Testament was a shadow. And so we're supposed to read those things and pull out of them things that are supposed to still have great meaning to us as Christians. And so the temple, the most holy place, the Ark of the Covenant, all of those feelings that Jews had when they went to the most holy place, we're supposed to pull that out. And now the amazing thing is they had to travel to Jerusalem if they didn't live there. They had to make special times where they went there. The amazing thing is all I have to do is turn to God in my mind, in my heart, and I am there. What a privilege we have as Christians to be able to do that. But even though I'm able to do that as a Christian, to Terrell's point, we still live in a world of sin, right? We still live in a world that faces darkness, just like those Christians did. So even though I can hit my knees and come right into the presence of God, there is still a sense of not fully there yet, right? And so what does he say here? For those that come to this city, in verse 22, they don't see it. There's no temple to go to have that. Why? What's the difference? We've kind of got one level up now, the reality, the substance that's in Christ. But then when he appears and heaven and earth flee away and he has that judgment, and to those that are on his right, he says, "Come in, my faithful servants." What do we now get to experience?
Be in his presence.
Yeah, fully in his presence. Sam?
Yeah, that's exactly what I was thinking. Instead of God coming down to man at the temple, we finally get to go to him where he is.
Right. And it's just like, it just paints this picture is that once you're there, you are just in his presence. Doesn't matter where you're at in the city, because you don't have to go to a temple somewhere. You're just there. And it's as much as, and then he paints this, the very next thing he says, "And the city has no need of the sun or of the moon to shine on it, for the glory of God has illumined it, and its lamp is the Lamb." Isn't it a wonderful feeling? And I know we're getting this a little bit now as winter's starting to turn and spring is starting to come. Those days when the sun comes out and it hits you, how does that feel? Really nice. But this city, it's not a time. It's not a season. It's not a certain, I've got to go outside. There's no need of the sun, because just God's presence is everywhere. And no matter how I try to explain this, I don't think there's any way that we can fully comprehend what this means. What does it mean that there is no darkness, there is no place where God's presence is not felt and fully experienced? I can't begin to imagine.
When you're thinking about the attributes of God, the communicable and incommunicable, but all those omnis. It's
Yeah.
just omni.
Yeah,
It's everything all the time.
right,
Some of those are even hard to explain.
right, yeah.
God's always there. Right?
God's omnipresence, his omnipotence, and his presence and his power will be everywhere there.
In that verse 24, I think is another reason why we don't need the temple. The temple was exclusive to one nation. And that was the Jewish nation. And here he's beginning, he says, he doesn't say the nation will walk, but the nations will walk in lights. The idea of, the old temple, the imagery there, that was for these God's chosen people. Well, Christ came not just for God's chosen people, but for all the nations. And I think, thinking maybe, take that old analogy and bring it on into this new eternal thing, someone said, well, y'all always got to go in the temple. Now we can. It would be a point of contention, you know. We don't want those Gentile Christians in our temple, you know. So no, there's no temple. God takes care of it that way. I mean, it's my mind
There's
running,
no-
but I do find
sure.
it interesting that after saying there's no temple, he then mentions that the nations will be coming in.
Yeah, all nations can be the chosen people now, and so it's a pretty amazing picture to think about. And we talked about last time, the verse 25, the gates will never be closed. All the nations bring their glory and honor into it. Nothing unclean, no abomination, only those whose names are written in the Lamb's Book of Life. What other questions, thoughts do you have, 22 through the end of the chapter?
When we talk about, and I'm just asking, when we talk about the temple, we now are the temple of the Holy Spirit.
That's right.
When we're transfigured, we no longer have this division away from God. Now when we go there, we are totally able to talk, to see, to interact, and to be with Him the way it was in the garden
Right.
in the beginning. So is that okay for me to think that? I mean, I just.
Yeah, I mean, I think you're creating a good segue into chapter 22, because I believe that's exactly the picture he paints, is everything that happened from the time they first sinned. I mean, just think about all of the sin, all of the wickedness, how the world has broken down because of it, how people and humanity has broken down because of it. Everything has been reversed and back to the perfection of that it was when he said, it's done, and it was very good. And he walked in the garden among them. So let's use that to go into chapter 22. Then he showed me a river of the water of life, clear as crystal, coming from the throne of God and of the Lamb. In the middle of its street, on either side of the river, was the tree of life, bearing 12 kinds of fruit, yielding its fruit every month, and the leaves of the tree were for the healing of the nations. There will no longer be any curse, and the throne of God and of the Lamb will be in it, and his bondservants will serve him. They will see his face, and his name will be on their foreheads, and there will no longer be any night, and they will not have need of the light of a lamp nor the light of the sun, because the Lord God will illumine them, and they will reign forever and ever. And he said to me, these words are faithful and true. And the Lord, the God of the spirits of the prophets, sent his angel to show his bondservants the things which must soon take place. And behold, I am coming quickly. Blessed is he who heeds the words of the prophecy of this book. I, John, am the one who heard and saw these things, and when I heard and saw, I fell down to worship at the feet of the angel who showed me these things. But he said to me, do not do that. I am a fellow servant of yours and of your brethren, the prophets, and of those who heed the words of this book. Worship God. Let's pause there. So when you start reading chapter 22, at least to me, the way that it's written, you immediately start getting senses of, this is kind of like reading Genesis chapters 1 and 2 and the things that he says there. I mean, obviously most prominently you have, he says, the rivers and the tree of life are there. What, as you're reading this section, what begins to stick out to you?
It's a place I want to be.
Yeah.
You know, it's wonderful.
It's all about life and all positive things.
Right.
And then on the bad side of town,
There is no bad side of town. That's right. One of the things that you notice is that what's happening here is the fulfillment of the promises Jesus made back in chapters 2 and 3. When he says, to him who overcomes, I will give. To him who overcomes, this will happen. Basically, all of those things are restated in chapters 21 and 22. So again, the book is coming full circle. He said, before, remember how we kind of looked at chapters 1 through 3 as, well, before I get into dealing with your specific problem, I am going to tell you about things that are soon going to take place. We're going to deal with this issue. But first, we need to deal with some things that I'm seeing among the churches. And he talks about that, and then he says, to him who overcomes, you're going to get this, and you're going to get this, and you're going to get this. Well, now he's saying, this is what's going to happen when I come in judgment and I take you to myself. This is when you're going to get all of these things. And so you can see all of the things mentioned there. The tree of life is mentioned. Here, not hurt by the second death. You're going to have a new name. You'll have authority over the nations. He talks about, I'll give you the morning star. We'll read that later in chapter 22. Again, clothed in white, the book of life. You're a pillar in the temple. You are the new Jerusalem. But one thing I specifically want you to see is back in Revelation chapter 2 and verse 7. Revelation 2 and verse 7. He who has an ear, let him hear what the Spirit says to the churches. To him who overcomes, I will grant to eat of the tree of life, which is in the paradise of God. In the paradise of God. Does anybody have a different translation there? Or a footnote for paradise of God?
Is this what it's, is this the same philosophy, Genesis 3, verse 22, when he cast them out of the garden? He said they would become like us if they eat of the tree of life. I mean, is that,
Yeah, I mean, I think he calls that's the curse, is when they were removed from the garden. Right.
they put guards around the tree of life? If they eat of it, they would become like them, live forever.
Right, yes.
Statement about Eden in Ezekiel 28:13. Description. You were in Eden, the garden of God. Every precious stone was your covering. Ruby, topaz, diamond, beryl, onyx, jasper, lapis lazuli, turquoise, and the emerald and the gold and the workmanship of your settings and socket was in you on that day you were created. You were prepared.
Yeah, so you see that connection with Ezekiel there. You were in the garden of God. He uses the mention of some of those same stones that he did in chapter 21. Well, where it says the paradise of God, the Greek word sounds pretty much like English, paradisos. You can hear where we got paradise from. The Greek translation of the Old Testament, which is the one that is clearly quoted by the apostles and Jesus in the New Testament. Paradisos is the Greek word for garden. It's the word from Genesis when it talks about they were in the garden. And now he says, I'm going to give you the tree of life in the paradise of God, in the garden of God. They, reading this, the first century Christians, they would have immediately gone back because that's where they are hearing garden of God is back in the Old Testament and thinking about Eden. So I think, Sandra, to your point, that's exactly what the Lord wants us to think is, because we can only imagine. Can you imagine what it was like the moment God said, it's done and this is very good? Everything in the world, in the universe, perfect. There's never been a sin. And it talks about God in such a way as if he walks in the garden amongst the people. It's a relationship with God. It's a presence that it's hard for us to imagine because of the world that we live in. And the passage says we're going to be going to the garden. Oh, I'm sorry. I thought I thought I saw your hand come up. Any other questions or thoughts? So, We talked a little bit about the rivers already. There were rivers in Eden, and the sea's been removed, but now there are rivers, which rivers are sources of life, and you build cities next to rivers because of what they can provide. And you've got it's a fruitful land, the tree of life bearing 12 kinds of fruit, and notice it's yielding its fruit every month. What is that? Why does he point that out?
There will always be fruit on that tree.
Yeah, it's not like Terrell trying to plant grapefruits here and, it's not going to happen. This tree is going to bear fruit and it'll never stop. And at any point, it's just going to keep bearing fruit. And what's the purpose of this, the fruit? And it says the leaves of the tree. The healing of the nations. What are we being healed from? The curse. The curse. The same word that's used to talk about salvation throughout the Bible is also a word that means healing from sickness. Sin is a sickness that has been plaguing us ever since the first one was committed. And it's like it just gets worse, and it's going to be turned back. It's going to be healed from all of that.
It's not just a healing of the curse, from the sin itself, but sin has consequences. The curse on Adam and Eve, the pain, the sweat, all that they had to do. We don't have to do in heaven. I don't have to work. You don't have to get up in a sweat of your brow, and of course, we're not married, so we won't have children in heaven, but at least the pain is gone. So it's not just sin itself, which is being relieved of that, but everything else that we deem as difficult or gets in the way,
Right.
it's all going to be gone.
Right. All those things that came right after sin are removed. It's turned back. The interesting thing, though, this is a little bit of a side point, but if you go back to Genesis, they were working in the garden before the curse. So there may be work in heaven to some extent. I don't know what that, but work wasn't the curse. It was those challenges, those barriers, the things that came out. That was the curse. And so maybe it's the enjoyable parts of work that we still get to be a part of in heaven.
And just an interesting side note, you just said that. While I was up in Pennsylvania, they had several question and answer sessions. So you're up there and you just get all kinds of bizarre things. And one of the questions that was presented to me, and these ladies, they had been listening on television. There's lots of preachers on television, and they were concerned because whoever it was, their message was, when you get to heaven, you're going to have to work hard. And they said, where in the world is that in the Bible? Because they're telling us we have to work hard, and I thought, I wouldn't have to work anymore anyway. So it shows that you never know what you might face.
Yeah.
Because I've always thought, because I go on here, he doesn't talk about necessarily working. He says,
Right.
I'm going to rule forever.
Mhm.
That doesn't sound like we're working, because usually those who rule don't work. And then, but we will worship. That was my
Yes.
answer to him. I
Yeah.
know we're going to be busy worshiping God and ruling,
Yeah.
but I don't know of any other work otherwise.
Yeah. I know.
Blessed are they for the rest from their labors.
Rest from their labors. Yeah.
Except for they gotta work hard.
Some people have difficulty resting.
Mm-hmm.
So it works for them.
Yeah. So there will no longer be any curse. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Before we get further from 6 on, is that I want to point out the reality of this, is that as much as we think about heaven and the city of God and all like that, we can get real yucky, spiritual, where it's not real.
Mm.
But in 21, he says, I saw the city come down.
Mhm.
And here you have the nations coming into it.
Mhm.
You have the fruit
us. And I think that's so important. You look at this description. It's a reality. It's not some, realm where you're some kind of glowing thing sitting on a cloud floating somewhere. That's not the picture that we get of heaven. It is an existence. It is even 1 Corinthians 15. Our physical human body will be raised from the dead and changed into a spiritual body. It'll be different. It's not the same flesh and blood, but it will be a body. It will be an existence. So as much as whatever this is real to us, it's kind of like we said before, that will be even more real. Heaven and earth flee away, the curtains. It's not that everything is just, can't touch it kind of a thing. So I think that is an important point for us to see, that it is, whatever it is reality. It is as real as this is now. And so there's no longer going to be any curse. And it talks about the healing of the nations. What kind of healing needs to be done of the nations? And then you can apply that just in general too to this curse. What has happened in our world? What needs to be healed?
Prejudice and animosity.
War,
Injustice, prejudice, animosity, war. I'm sorry? Need for power. I'm striving for that. Racism, sexual immorality, hatred, all these things. And it's not just the sin in of itself. It's not just the fact that God said don't do it, and that's what the problem is. The problem is it hurts us inside, and it hurts other people, and it rips people apart, and it causes war, and causes all kinds of things. It causes churches to be torn to pieces, and all of these things. And here's what we're moving towards. We're moving towards an existence, a real place where all of that is healed. I don't have to feel that way anymore. I don't have to. That's not the reality. That's not history anymore. History is gone, and now eternity is present. And it is an eternity where those things are just gone. I can't think of much better than that. Where I can be with people, how many times, even people that you love. Let's just get real for a minute, even with each other. How many times in conversations, because of things that have happened, because of things in the past, whatever it is, how many times, and it's like, watch what I say, or how's this going to go, or is this going to end up bad, and those things are gone in heaven. We just have the perfect relationship with him and with each other. I can't think of much better than that. What other thoughts or questions do you have?
sounds like a great place.
Sounds like a great place. Amen.
That's right.
Sign us up.
To Laura's comment about the reality of it, it's the kinetic existence of it. Verse 6, he says, the angels, I think he's trying to make that point with John. This isn't fictitious. This isn't some fairy tale. He says, everything you have heard and seen, he uses two words, trustworthy and true. It's real.
Right.
So that follow up for what Laura
Yeah.
was saying, it's great.
These words are faithful and true.
It's hard for us, it's hard to just imagine this, because this life is all we know. This is what we know. And we're very comfortable with what we know. We're comfortable with the seasons of the year. We're comfortable with the cyclical day and nights. We're comfortable with earthly relationships. We're comfortable with all these things. It's all we know. And what John is able to see is
think that's important. It's different and it's hard to fathom sometimes, but it's where we want to be heading, and it's who we want to be with. And I think, again, that's the focus, is God. He's there. Sometimes we get so focused on, I want to go to heaven, I want to go to heaven. Sometimes I hear Christians talk about, I want to go to heaven more than I want to be with God. And I'm not sure that that's what some people want. They want to go to heaven so they can be left alone and be by themselves and kind of enjoy what they have. But it's about being with God.
Amen.
It's about having a relationship with God. And real quick, is just thinking about as we turn towards the last few verses, he says these words are faithful and true in verse 6. And then he uses that language that he's used from the beginning to kind of bring this again full circle. He sent his angel to show these things which must soon take place. Remember, it's I, John, the one that's bringing this to you. And I think it's like, okay, now I've shown you what's ahead, and kind of to what Joe said, sign us up. This is where we want to go for eternity. But I think he's bringing it back around, and he says, so it's not something that you just sign up and then you sit back. He says, blessed is he who heeds the words of the prophecy of this book. If you want to go there, then Christians, first century Christians, dealing with this evil empire now, dealing with persecution, dealing with suffering now, be faithful in your situation. Heed these words, and then you will get that. I promise you will get that. But each one of us need to hear this in the context of be faithful then in your situation, in your life. Whatever it is that you have in your life, heed the words of the prophecy. Be faithful to God, and he will give you the crown of life. We'll finish up there next time, and then we have singing on Wednesday, and then next Sunday we'll finish up a few verses there, and then maybe get into talking about a few other topics for the month of March.